Today I want to talk to you about why we use AMS in our spray tanks and why that's so important for our herbicide applications. We're going to talk about some of that chemistry and why it's so important to use AMS and Class Act in our spray tanks. So when we apply a herbicide just to water without any kind of water conditioner, AMS or Class Act, what ends up happening is that herbicide will want to interact with the cations that are in the water. Unless you're using truly straight distilled water, you're going to have cations in the water. And so what ends up happening, let's say it's glyphosate. When you apply glyphosate to unconditioned water, that glyphosate will be attracted to the calciums, the magnesiums, the irons, the sodiums, any of those positively charged cations. And when that happens, it kind of ties up that herbicide and it really doesn't make it effective in the plant. And so what you are applying is actually a much lower rate than what you think you were getting. Now, when we use AMS and Class Act in our spray tank and apply that before we add in our herbicide, what ends up happening is that AMS will then interact with the cations in the water. Okay, so when we add AMS, what ends up happening, the AMS will separate into 2 ammoniums and 1 sulfate. That sulfate binds with the hard water cations to form a salt. And then the ammonium is then attracted to the glyphosate. This is what we want to happen because that ammonium really helps get that glyphosate, that herbicide, into the plant so it can do its job. Now, we need to understand that we need to have enough AMS in the water and enough AMS to meet labor requirements to make sure we're softening the water, but also enough to help pull that herbicide into the plant. Now that we understand some of the basic chemistry, I often get asked, well, how much Class Act do I need to apply to my spray tank before I add in my herbicide? Well, let's look at some water analysis so we can better understand how much Class Act we need to make a really prescriptive analysis and rate when it comes to using our Class Act. Let's talk about how to read a water sample analysis and how it can really help you out in figuring out how much AMS you need for your spray tank. So in this water analysis, you can see that the location's out of Greenleaf, Idaho, okay? And in Greenleaf, Idaho, the water analysis shows that the hardness is at 42. That's very high. Typically, we like to see this below 10, sometimes even 5. The pH is around 7.56. And what's really driving the hardness of the water are the cations and metals. So it's your calcium, your magnesium, your copper, your iron, those types of things. So in this analysis, it shows that you need 3 pounds of AMS per 100 just to soften the water. And we need that just to soften it, just so that AMS can now interact with those metal cations in the water. Now we're looking at a completely different state. We're looking at McMinnville, Oregon. So in this analysis, we see that the hardness is much lower. We're at a 9, but that still doesn't mean we're not going to have a little bit of tie-up. So as you can see, the hardness is below 9. The pH is fantastic. We're near neutral. Our iron and copper is non-existent in this water analysis. But as you can see, we still need over a half a pound of AMS per 100 gallons just to soften the water. Now, when it comes to applying AMS to your spray tank, you need an additional 4 to 8 pounds, typically, in addition to the half pound or the 3 pounds at this Idaho location, just to soften the water and to meet the labor requirements and the AMS needed to help bring in the herbicide better into the plant. So you have 3 pounds here, you have over half a pound here, but then you need an additional 4 to 8 pounds. So you're looking anywhere from 7 to roughly 10 pounds of AMS needed per 100 gallons just to make your herbicide work effective and efficiently and to meet labor requirements. Now that we've looked at the water analysis and we see how much AMS we need to soften the water and how much AMS we need to meet label requirements, we now can go to our Class Act conversion chart to see how much Class Act we need and how much AMS we'll get out of that Class Act application. So in that first analysis, we saw we needed 3 pounds of AMS just to soften the water, plus an additional 4 to 8. So you needed roughly around a minimum of 7 pounds of AMS. So how much Class Act do we need to get that much AMS? We're looking right around anywhere from 2% to 2.25%, even to 2.5% volume to volume. So you come over here, we need roughly anywhere from 2 gallons to 2.5 gallons of Class Act to meet those AMS requirements for our spray tank. Now, when we think about the Oregon location where you only need 0.62 pounds of AMS to soften the water, then you need an additional 4 to 8 on top of that. So you're looking at roughly a minimum of about 5 pounds of AMS, and you can go all the way up to roughly 8-ish. Okay, so you're looking at anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5% volume to volume to soften the water and meet labor requirements. So you're looking at roughly 1.5 gallons of Class Act needed, all the way up to 2.5 gallons of Class Act needed. Now that we've learned how AMS works and the benefits of WinField's Class Act, how to read a water analysis, and how to use the Class Act conversion chart, we now need to understand that every label is a little bit different depending on what herbicide you use. So please read in depth the label requirements for the herbicide you're using. You may not need as much AMS, or you may need more than what we talked about today. So please read those labels and understand them to make sure you are following the label correctly. If you have any questions about what sets Class Act apart, please reach out to your regional agronomist or your account manager, and we can talk you through it about why it's such a great product. Thank you.